Lisa had always imagined the birth of her first child as a moment filled with joy and anticipation. She and her husband had worked hard to secure the best care possible, choosing one of the most prestigious hospitals in the city. But from the moment she arrived, she could sense something was off. Dr. Collins, the attending physician, was cold from the start. He barely looked at Lisa when he introduced himself, his tone laced with condescension. At first, she tried to brush it off, thinking he was just having a bad day. But as the hours passed, it became clear. His attitude was more than just indifference. It was something darker. Every interaction with him felt like a test, an unspoken challenge to her presence in a place he clearly believed she didn't belong. When Lisa asked questions about her birth plan, Dr. Collins dismissed her concerns with a curt response, acting as if she were wasting his time. The other doctors and nurses bustled around the maternity ward with warmth and professionalism, but Collins remained an icy figure in the background, his eyes filled with something Lisa recognized all too well: judgment. "Are you sure you understand what we're talking about here?" he asked at one point, his words laced with thinly veiled disdain. "We have a very specific standard of care at this hospital." Lisa swallowed the lump in her throat and steadied her voice. "I understand perfectly," she replied, meeting his gaze head on. The tension only grew as labor progressed. When Lisa expressed concern about the pain she was experiencing, Collins sighed, shaking his head. "Labor isn't easy for anyone," he said dismissively. "We have protocols in place. There's no need to make a fuss." Tears burned in Lisa's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had always known the world could be unfair, but experiencing it in such a vulnerable moment felt like a cruel twist of fate. Thankfully, Lisa's husband and the hospital's compassionate nurses stood by her side, offering the support she so desperately needed. One nurse, sensing the tension in the room, quietly reassured Lisa that she was heard, that she mattered. Despite the discrimination she faced, Lisa remained strong. She held on to the belief that her worth was not determined by the prejudices of one man. As she finally welcomed her baby into the world, she focused on the love surrounding her rather than the judgment she had endured. After the birth, Lisa considered filing a formal complaint against Dr. Collins. No woman should have to experience such treatment, especially during such a critical moment in life. She knew that speaking up might not change his perspective, but it could pave the way for others to receive the dignity and care they deserved. Lisa's journey was a reminder that discrimination can appear even in the most unexpected places, but resilience and self-worth remain powerful forces in the face of prejudice. The mysterious disappearance of the baby. One chilly night, as the hospital buzzed quietly under the dull glow of fluorescent lights, Lisa lay in her bed, utterly exhausted. The relentless hours of labor had drained her, and after a brief visit from the nurse, she finally drifted off into a heavy sleep. Her newborn son, wrapped snugly in a soft blue blanket, lay beside her, barely making a sound. But when she awoke, everything had changed. The room was eerily still. The comforting warmth of her baby's presence was gone. Her heart skipped a beat. She bolted upright, eyes wide, scanning the empty crib beside her. Her breath caught in her throat, and a surge of panic washed over her. The baby. He was gone. Lisa scrambled out of bed, her legs shaky as she rushed to the door. She pressed the button for the nurse, her fingers trembling with anxiety. But when the nurse finally appeared, her face remained unreadable, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "He's gone. My baby," Lisa gasped, struggling to control her breath. "Where is he?" The nurse's eyes flickered, but she offered no comfort, only a slight shrug. "You probably fell asleep and didn't realize. Maybe he was taken to the nursery." Lisa's mind raced. How could she have missed it? She would never have fallen asleep if she knew her baby was taken away. Frantic, she turned toward the hall. She ran to the nearest desk where Collins, a hospital staff member she had seen only in passing, sat with a smug look on his face, sipping his coffee as if nothing was wrong. "My baby's gone. I need help. Do you know where he is?" Lisa demanded, her voice rising with desperation. Collins didn't even look up from his cup. "Well, I guess that's a real problem, huh?" he muttered sarcastically, his tone cold. But it's probably just a mix-up, don't you think? It happens all the time." The dismissive response felt like a slap in the face. Lisa's breath hitched, but she wasn't about to back down. "This is not a mix-up. He was here. He was right here next to me. Collins finally glanced up, his eyes sharp with indifference. Look, lady, we've got a lot of patients to attend to. I'm sure someone will find your baby eventually. Lisa stood frozen for a moment, as if the words didn't even register. The hospital, her supposed sanctuary, was turning into a maze of neglect and cruelty. As every minute stretched on, the thought gnawed at her. Where was her son? And why was no one taking her seriously? She knew she had to find him. But time was running out, and it felt like everyone in the hospital had their backs turned to her in her time of need. Mark's investigation. Mark couldn't shake the growing unease gnawing at him as he drove to the hospital the next morning. Lisa's frantic call, her voice shaking with panic, replayed in his mind. He had barely been able to comprehend the words when she told him their son had disappeared in the night. But now, as the administrator of the very hospital where this had happened, Mark knew that it was time to take action. His mind was focused. He needed answers, and he needed them quickly. When Mark walked through the hospital's sterile hallways, his footsteps echoed in the quiet morning. The usual hustle and bustle of the day hadn't yet begun, but the unease was already settling in. Something was terribly wrong, and Mark could feel it in his bones. His wife was right. There had been no sign of their baby. No one could explain it. Collins, the staff member who had dismissed Lisa the previous night, was his first lead. Mark had never trusted the man. He had always seemed too aloof, too indifferent for someone working in such a delicate environment. Mark started by speaking to a few of the nurses, asking casually about Collins' role in the hospital. It didn't take long for him to hear whispers, whispers that raised the hairs on the back of his neck. There were rumors, missing babies, but nothing that was ever investigated, at least not thoroughly. The hospital's administration had kept the stories buried for years, and Mark's mind raced as the pieces started to fit together. Determined, he dug deeper into the hospital's records. What he uncovered made his blood run cold. Over the past few months, there had been several mysterious disappearances of newborns under Collins's supervision. Some were written off as cases of parents failing to claim their children, while others were labeled as miscommunications or administrative errors. But Mark knew better. These weren't accidents. This was something far darker. He carefully sifted through reports, security footage, and medical logs. His heart pounded as he discovered a pattern. The disappearances always seemed to coincide with Collins' shifts, and in each case, the babies were taken under the guise of being transferred for additional care. Mark wasn't just looking at incompetence anymore. This was something orchestrated. Hours of digging revealed something more shocking than he could have ever imagined: a child trafficking network operating under the hospital's very roof. The investigation led Mark down a rabbit hole of corruption, deceit, and criminal activity. People in high places were involved. Collins wasn't working alone. He was just a cog in a much larger machine. The evidence was undeniable. Emails, phone records, coded documents, all pointing to a network selling newborns to the highest bidder. And at the center of it all, Collins seemed to be the ringleader. As Mark pieced everything together, his heart clenched with a fierce resolve. He couldn't allow this to continue, not for a second longer. The safety of his son, his wife, and every other family that trusted the hospital hung in the balance. Mark knew he was walking into dangerous territory, but there was no turning back now. He had uncovered the truth, and he was determined to expose it no matter the cost. Exposing the crime. With the evidence in hand, Mark's heart pounded with a mixture of dread and determination. He had seen the truth, dark, horrifying, and unimaginable. But now it was time to confront the man at the center of it all, Collins. Mark's mind raced as he walked into Collins's office, the quiet hum of fluorescent lights overhead adding to the tension that hung thick in the air. Collins sat behind his desk, sipping his coffee, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. Mark didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I know what you've been doing," Mark said, his voice low but steady, his eyes locked onto Collins. "I have the evidence." Collins looked up, his smug demeanor faltering for just a moment, but it quickly returned, as if to shield him from the weight of the truth. "Evidence?" Collins scoffed, leaning back in his chair, his fingers tapping the desk. "You really think you can just throw accusations like that around without consequences?" Mark set the stack of papers down on Collins' desk, a cold silence filling the room as Collins's eyes flickered over the documents. He could see the weight of the evidence: email chains, security footage, financial transactions, proof that Collins had been running a child trafficking ring under the guise of his medical position. Babies had been stolen, families destroyed, all for profit. The realization hit Collins like a punch to the gut. For a moment, he was speechless. "You think you can bring me down with this?" Collins finally sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I've been untouchable. No one will believe you." But Mark didn't back down. "The board will believe me, and once they see the evidence, you won't have a leg to stand on." Mark had already made arrangements with the hospital's board. He knew they would be shocked by the allegations, but he also knew they couldn't ignore the truth any longer. That same afternoon, Mark presented the evidence in a formal meeting with the board. He watched as their faces changed from confusion to disbelief, then to horror as they absorbed the full extent of Colin's crimes. The room was filled with heated arguments, but one thing was clear: Collins could no longer be trusted. He had destroyed countless lives, leaving a trail of anguish and heartbreak in his wake. Babies had vanished into the shadows, and their families were left to suffer, not knowing where their children had gone or why they had been taken from them. The board acted swiftly. Collins was stripped of his medical license on the spot, his reputation shattered beyond repair. The weight of his actions sank in as he was escorted out of the building, his head low, unable to look anyone in the eye. The once coveted position he had held was gone, his years of deceit laid bare for all to see. For Mark, the victory felt hollow. He had exposed the monster behind the veil, but it had come at a terrible price. Families would never get back the children they had lost, and the hospital's reputation would forever be tainted by the stain of Colin's actions. Still, Mark found some solace in the knowledge that the truth had prevailed, that the dark underworld of child trafficking in the hospital had been torn apart. Lisa's eyes were red from crying when Mark returned home that evening. The relief in her voice was evident when she saw the weight of the situation had finally come to an end. But Mark knew that healing would take time, for his family, for the victims, and for the hospital that would now have to rebuild itself from the wreckage left behind by Colin's betrayal. The fight wasn't over. But for now, justice had been served. The journey to find their son days turned into weeks as Mark and Lisa sifted through the aftermath of their investigation. Though Collins had been exposed, the pain of losing their son still lingered, gnawing at them. Every lead, every document they uncovered pointed to one chilling truth. Their baby had been sold to an unsuspecting family, a family who had no idea their child had been stolen. The realization hit them both like a gut punch. There was another mother and father out there who had been lied to, who had been given a child that wasn't theirs by blood, but who had grown to love and raise him as their own. The cruelty of it all was almost unbearable. But Mark and Lisa knew one thing for certain: they had to bring their son home, no matter the cost. The search was grueling, but after weeks of following the trail, they finally discovered the adoptive family's whereabouts. The family had no idea about the deception, no idea that their child's origins were anything but legitimate. Mark and Lisa understood the delicate nature of the situation. They didn't want to traumatize their son, nor did they want to cause harm to the family who had taken him in and given him a life full of love. They had to proceed cautiously. "I don't know how to do this," Lisa said quietly one evening as they sat in their living room, the weight of the task ahead heavy on her shoulders. "How do we tell them the truth? How do we get our son back without destroying everything they've built for him?" Mark took her hand, squeezing it gently. He knew how much this weighed on her, how much it weighed on both of them. "We'll go slowly," he said, his voice firm yet filled with compassion. "We won't take him away from them. We'll give them the chance to understand what happened and we'll explain it. But he's our son, and we can't let this go on any longer." The next morning, Mark and Lisa drove to the family's home. Their hearts raced as they neared the address they had found, the house sitting quietly on a suburban street like any other home. But to them, it felt like a strange, foreign place. The home of a family they never intended to know. They parked down the street and sat for a moment, watching the house. The curtains were drawn, and through the window, They could see a glimpse of a child playing in the living room. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. That was their son, the little boy who had once been theirs, now laughing and playing with his adoptive parents. Mark placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice soft but resolute. We'll do this the right way. We're not here to hurt them. We just need our son back. They walked up to the front door, their hearts pounding in their chests. They rang the bell, and after a few moments, the door opened. A woman, perhaps in her early 40s, stood there. She smiled warmly, her eyes full of kindness. But the smile faltered when she saw the anxious expressions on Mark and Lisa's faces. Can I help you? The woman asked, her voice polite but confused. Mark spoke first, his words carefully measured. We're here about your son, he began, his throat tightening. We need to talk about something very important. The woman's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. Our son? What do you mean? Lisa stepped forward, her voice shaking as she explained. There's something you need to know. Our son, he was taken from us. He was stolen from the hospital and somehow he ended up in your care. You didn't know, but he's ours. The woman stood frozen, her mouth slightly open as the weight of Lisa's words settled in. Her eyes flickered with disbelief. I don't understand. We adopted him. We've had him since he was just a baby. Her voice quivered, a deep pain beginning to form as she processed the news. Mark nodded slowly. I know this is hard to hear, but we didn't come to blame you. We're just asking for your understanding and for you to know the truth. They stood there, the silence thick between them. The woman's husband appeared from the hallway, a worried expression on his face. He looked at Mark and Lisa, then at his wife, and finally, the weight of the situation hit him. He sat down on the couch, rubbing his forehead in shock. The couple was understandably shaken, and Mark and Lisa could feel the tremor of emotion running through them as well. This was the hardest thing they had ever done, standing face to face with the people who had loved and cared for their son, knowing that their worlds were about to collide in a way that would forever change everything. But Mark and Lisa stayed calm. They explained the full extent of the situation, how their son had been taken, sold, and raised by another family. They reassured the couple that they weren't there to tear their world apart, but to give them time to process the truth. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the adoptive parents spoke, their voices raw but filled with understanding. We never knew, the woman said, her voice trembling. We never wanted to take anyone's child. We just wanted to give him a life. Tears welled in Lisa's eyes, but she held them back. I know, she whispered, her voice soft. I know you didn't mean for this to happen, but now we're all caught in this, and we have to figure out what's best for him. The conversation didn't end that day. It took time. It took heartache. But in the end, Mark and Lisa knew that they had done the right thing. They had approached the situation with care and compassion, never intending to cause pain, but to bring their son back into their arms. The journey to find their son wasn't over, but it was a beginning, a new chapter in a story of love, loss, and ultimately, a family coming together, no matter how broken the past had been. The camera zoomed out, capturing the entire scene. A blended family, united not by blood alone, but by the love and understanding they had forged together. Mark and Lisa exchanged a glance, their hearts full, knowing they had made the right decision. The pain of their past had not disappeared, but it had been replaced by a new kind of peace, one built on compassion, cooperation, and the hope of a better future. The boy ran toward his parents, his little arms reaching out for both his mother and father, a smile spread wide across his face. Mark and Lisa knelt down, their arms open, welcoming him without hesitation, as his adoptive parents stood by, sharing the same sense of contentment. This is what family looks like, Lisa whispered, her voice filled with emotion. Mark nodded, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Yeah, it is. Together, they watched their son run in circles, the world around them full of promise. The journey had been long, filled with pain and heartbreak, but in the end, it was love. Love that had conquered all. The screen faded to black, leaving the viewers with a profound sense of hope, a reminder that, even in the face of unimaginable adversity, the power of love and understanding could create a new beginning. It was a story of loss, pain, and the courage to rebuild, but most importantly, it was a testament to the strength of the human spirit. As the credits rolled, a soft melody played in the background, underscoring the theme of the video. The journey of Mark, Lisa, and their son had come full circle, but the ripple effect of their actions would continue to inspire others to choose empathy, justice, and the pursuit of a better, more loving world. The story didn't end with a perfect resolution. It ended with the promise of healing, one step at a time. And in that promise, there was a quiet, enduring victory. This reflection provides a poignant and deeply human exploration of the lessons that can be drawn from the journey of Mark, Lisa, and their son. It underscores the transformative power of compassion and understanding, highlighting how the most difficult situations, like the heartbreak of losing a child and the realization of injustice, can still lead to healing and growth when approached with empathy and cooperation. The story reminds us that life is often unpredictable and harsh, and systems designed to protect us can sometimes fail. But it also shows that there is always room for human kindness and connection. The decision to co parent, despite the challenges, was not just an act of compromise. It was a profound choice to focus on the child's best interests, putting love above all else. This narrative is a powerful call for us to reflect on how we deal with conflict and adversity in our own lives. It challenges us to think beyond our own pain, to recognize the humanity in others, and to seek solutions that bring about collective healing rather than further division. In moments of crisis, it is easy to become entrenched in anger and resentment, but the true lesson here is that the most enduring victories are those built on mutual respect, shared understanding, and love. The story of Mark, Lisa, and the adoptive family, in the end, is not just about restoring what was lost, but about creating something new, something stronger and more unified. It highlights that justice at its best is not about vengeance, but about collaboration and a commitment to the well being of all involved. By choosing compassion over division and understanding over anger, we can make the world a better, more just place for everyone.